This morning, we are going to continue going through amendments, I guess, from Representative Greer, and then we'll keep going through the Olson amendments. Welcome, Representative Greer.
Thank you, Chair. Do you just want me to give a brief summary as to?
What's the problem you're trying to solve, and then we can walk through that with Leggy.
So earlier in the year, I've been dealing with 3 separate property owners in Bennington that I know of, and I'm aware of in our area that are dealing with neighboring properties where someone's trying to set in or build a septic system. To the technicalities of what kind of septic system, I'm actually not too familiar right now off the top of my head with. But building it near the property line where there's an overshadowing onto their property. So their neighbors building a septic system and their properties being affected by it. So essentially trying to set up some kind of compensation study to see if property owners that are affected by overshadowing, whose land is devalued, whose land can't be used, to make sure that they're reasonably compensated for damages and losses. So that's pretty much the whole.
Do members have questions? Representative Austin?
Does it look at the other neighbor's property that is being encumbered by the septic system and see if that property would be able to set up a septic and water pool? You know, would they be able to build somewhere on their property? So it wouldn't be impacted by the neighboring property, their ability to build?
I believe, I'm sorry, I'm turning to Michael to make sure I believe so.
So, generally, the state follows a first in time permitting process. So the first permittee will have that isolation distance that goes on to the neighbor's property. If that neighbor subsequently wants to build, there hasn't been an analysis of whether or not that neighbor has alternatives. The first permit doesn't look at what the alternatives are on the second property. What is required is that there needs to be notification to the neighbor who is going to be overshadowed. And then the concept is that they negotiate or they try to figure out an alternative that will work for both. But that doesn't always happen. And it leads to tension.
And are you, in the examples that you've run into, has there been communication between the neighbors and a lack of ability to come to agreement?
Yep, in all 3 cases, there's been notification, communication, but no resolution. And one, the resolution is going to be that they're going to spend about $30,000 to build a spite well to stop them from putting in a septic tank. So, yeah, it's bad.
And how big are the parcels?
Parcels, I'm wanting to, off my memory, I'd say that example where the spite well may take place, about 2 acres for each. The one out on the west end is much larger. So I don't know, maybe 100 acres for one and then maybe 10 acres for the other one that's going on. So larger tracts.
Do members, Representative Pritchard?
Probably this is questions for Michael. So once that shadow encroaches on somebody's property, there's no reciprocity for the landowner to do the same. They've given up that.
Under the rules, there are restrictions on the use of that land within the isolation distance. So that overshadowed property has restrictions. I mean, I don't know what you mean by reciprocity. Is it if the overshadowed neighbor tries to overshadow back?
Yes, that's what I mean.
I mean, this issue came up in the mid 2000s, 2008, 2010. And that's what people were trying to do. And it was a problem. And spite wells were really, I wouldn't say they were popular, but they were occurring pretty frequently. And the notification was intended to try to resolve that. It hasn't fully resolved.
Representative Ted Livia.
The notification is required by law currently?
By statute.
How much notification prior to the construction of?
I think it's 30 days. I would have to double check that. And also if you're building and you have to redesign your system in order to, because site conditions can change, right? You don't know that there's a huge boulder where you thought you were going to put. So you have to move it and the isolation distance can then extend onto the neighbor's property. Then you have to give notice then as well. I don't remember the exact number of days, but I can double check that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's walk through this with Michael and then we'll have more questions.
So there is some additional information you should be aware of. In the mid-2000s, 2010, the General Assembly required the Technical Advisory Committee to do a report on overshadowing. And they addressed a lot of the issues. It's a good report. The TAC usually does good reports and basically said to keep the isolation distances as they were, the health-based first in time system. They discussed whether or not legal access onto your neighbor's property should be required. But they didn't recommend that because they effectively, they said that that's going to lead to the need for compensation and or neighbor disputes. And so they didn't recommend that. However, the current TAC has an overshadowing committee in their annual report last year. They said that they're going to look at, and let me find it. There are concerns about the restrictions that can be imposed on neighboring properties, and the issue has been reviewed several times, and the options for minimizing or eliminating the impact on neighboring property considered. The TAC issued the report in 2010. The report recommended retention of first in time approach. The legislature added requirement. The TAC created a subcommittee in 2024 and continued discussions in 2025. The primary issue reviewed was the isolation distances required between water sources and wastewater disposal systems. These distances are larger than many other states, but the TAC has agreed that they should be evaluated using available research. So they're looking at, right? They haven't reached any conclusion, but they have an overshadowing subcommittee. They're looking at the issue. You know, maybe you pivot this into as part of their annual report next year, they address whatever you want them to address about overshadowing.
Brian, are you on the TAC?
I am not, for the record, Brian Redmond, Director of Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. I actually do not sit on the TAC. Bruce Douglas, who's appeared before this committee, is our agency lead on the TAC. But the issues that Michael mentioned from 2024, we've been engaging the TAC to try to take a deeper look at overshadowing requirements. It's an area that our staff spend a tremendous amount of time explaining the requirements and the laws to Vermonters. And in addition, it's an area that's very heavily litigated within our program. So it's a constant source of focus for us. And so I've been engaged with getting them engaged, but not sitting on them.
Is there a way to characterize, I mean, if this has been looked at for 15 years, what are we stuck on?
I think there's a real tension between the protection of potable water supplies and the health and science-based standards and the application of those and the effects that has on neighboring properties and potential encumbrances on their land. And so that tension right now is resolved through the notification process. This proposal looks at other means of resolving that tension. So that I think is probably the best answer. Thank you.
Okay, let's walk through this.
Okay, so there would be a new section that would be added to S 212, section 4A. It directs the TAC to the secretary to reconvene the TAC. You might not need that language. They already meet pretty regularly. As I said before, you could put it as part of their annual report to review authority under state statute and rule that allows the isolation distances for potable water supplies and wastewater systems to extend on a neighboring property. The TAC will summarize the purpose of allowing, I'm just going to call it overshadowing now, to extend and how isolation distances can limit the use of or encumber neighboring property. They will evaluate whether state law should continue to allow overshadowing. And then on page 2, if they conclude the state should continue to allow overshadowing, provide a basis for the conclusion, an explanation of why alternatives that do not encumber property of others would not be feasible, a recommendation on whether owners of potable water supplies or wastewater systems that encumber neighboring property should be required to compensate the owners of the encumbered property for lost value or for the use of the encumbered property. And then last, if the TAC concludes that state law should not continue to allow overshadowing, recommend how state statute or rules should be amended to eliminate that authority, and whether and how existing permits that allow for overshadowing can be amended to remove the authority for isolation distances to extend the neighboring property. And then they would give you their report on or before January 1, 2027. Again, you can make it part of the annual report, which they tend to send in January 15th.
Can you tell us who's on the TAC?
Yes. Mark Bannon, he's a professional engineer. Julia Bowden, she's a DEC drinking water hydrogeologist. Chris Campany, Wyndham Regional Planning Commission. Ernie Christensen, former head of Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. Scott Davis, licensed designer and excavating contractor. Tom DeBell, environmental health engineer. Bruce Douglas, who you've met. Brad Fisher, a service provider. Jenna Fleckenstein, water quality specialist. Craig Heindel, hydrogeologist. Seth Jensen, Lamoille County Planning Commission. Craig Jewett, professional engineer. Celia Larson, program manager at DEC for drinking water, groundwater protection. Gunnar McCain, licensed designer. Stephen Rebel, licensed designer and hydrogeologist. David Swift, technical service engineer. Roger Thompson, licensed designer, also former head of the division. Ken White, licensed well designer, well driller. Jeff Williams, licensed well driller. Jared Wiley, service provider. Sherry Young, licensed designer and certified professional soil scientist.
I think I counted 20 people. That's quite a committee.
And yeah, and if you know the people on it, it's a quite a committee.
And how often do they meet?
I don't know exactly how many. Let me look.
Probably just a quarter.
Quarterly now. They were more engaged and we kind of reduced the pace to around at this point. Next meeting in June.
And do you have a sense of like the universe of this problem? Can you, either of you speak to that? How often does this come up in a year?
I can get data that probably provides the amount of notifications that are associated with the permits that we issue. I don't have that with me today, but happy to report back on just the number of overshadowing cases. And we can pull that, and if we can't pull the actual data, we can probably give a pretty good estimate. It's an issue that there's significant engagement throughout the agency regarding, given the nature of the issue. So, you know, it feels pretty significant statewide, I would say. But as far as the hard numbers, I don't have that today.
Do you have a sense of how other states address this?
I think we're fairly unique, but I would like to consult with the team back at the office.
And so does ANR have a position on this?
I think if the committee has an interest in queuing this up for a dialogue, policy dialogue, which is worthwhile, we could support the amendment. I think we would look to have some minor adjustments for clarity, in the language, as well as one more substantive adjustment, that directs the TAC, just so that the record is fully rounded out, directs the TAC to provide the technical, legal, and scientific basis for what exists today. So really kind of rounding out why we're where we are, and then looking at these other issues that are currently in the amendment, just so it gives the full picture for the dialogue.
That makes sense. Do members have questions? Hey,
Everybody does.
like a big tie. I'll go around the table. Representative Richard.
So it sounds like it's not as simple as if, and I'm involved in one of these. Well, what was, we didn't take any action, but if the landowner that's being uncovered doesn't want this to happen, it's not that simple. So they have to defend somebody else using their own property. Is that how I'm understanding this? Because that's sure what it sounds like.
I mean, it can turn into that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, it's our family's camp down the lake. And the folks next door had to put in this fancy dancy $1 bazillion septic system that they're gonna use in the cornfield. But the circle came in to our property, our well, and we got our septic and our well, and we don't ever, I mean, camp's 100 years old. We don't plan on doing anything with it other than keeping it the way it is. So my sister and brother and I said, let's just not be jerks about this thing, and it is what it is. But in the event that we would sell that property and somebody wanted to, well, I'm sure that the state wouldn't allow the existing well and septic, so they'd have to have some whoopty-doopty design. And if it encroaches into that thing, they're not allowed to do it. Is that what I'm understanding, without spending who knows how much in litigation? And
I mean,
Sounds like a
site-specific
pretty crappy
conditions
law.
are hard to respond
Yeah,
to.
there's no variance then. The state has no variance to say, okay, you can, as long as it's good with the landowner, we can cut this distance down a little bit. There's just no provisions at all for that.
The well shield will exist. There are options for variances under the rules, especially in a best fix scenario, to remedy an existing system or supply issue. So that does exist within the regulations now, but the fact that overshadow is there, that will exist as a time. And I think what was envisioned is what you and your family did. That was kind of what was envisioned initially, but it doesn't always work that way.
And you won't need new systems unless they fail and or the new owner wants to change the capacity.
Yeah.
Design flows.
Okay.
Representative.
Thank you.
I've got a number of questions from the last topic. Isolation zones with respect to wastewater. Are two wastewater systems permitted currently to have overlapping isolation zones? Wastewater to wastewater.
I don't think they can overlap. But the distances are not as large as between wastewater and drinking water.
On page 2, lines 11 through 13, if TAC concludes that state law should not continue to allow isolation distances for potable water supplies. If that becomes law, what does that do for a backlog for new well and septic permits? Potentially.
Well, right now, this is just a report, right?
Right.
And so if there was the recommendation to do it, there's gonna need to be some additional language that's gonna be drawn. For example, Vermont follows the minority position in what's called the vested rights doctrine for land use. So in most jurisdictions, if the law changes between when you apply for an activity on your land and when you get your permit, you have to follow the law as it has changed. Right? In Vermont, that's not the case. You get the benefit of the law as it applied when you applied. And so we liked when you have done similar changes in law, you usually include a vested rights provision to recognize that minority position so that people don't have to litigate that in court. So that's probably what would happen. And we have several examples of how you've done that in the past.
Senator Sakowitz.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a comment than a question. I appreciate where this amendment is coming from, and I understand the problem that it's trying to solve. I'm a little, and I'm also really appreciative of the agency being willing to support this by devoting time to making this happen. But it does seem like this is something that you guys are working on a more or less continuous basis. It's something that's not an unknown issue, and it's something that you're constantly trying to make progress on to do the right thing. And it feels like a lot of what's being asked for in here is already really well understood by the parties that are of interest. And so I guess what I'm wondering is how helpful this will really be for future legislation, or how helpful it will be for the agency. And although I really, again, appreciate your willingness to take this on, and one of the things that we've heard again and again in this committee is that the Agency of Natural Resources has a lot to do, and there's not enough people to do it. And even though this is probably not a huge task, it's another thing to check off the list. And I really hesitate to ask you all to do yet another report. I just feel like I would need a more compelling reason to say, we really want you to do this. This is really important. So that's where I'm struggling a bit with this idea. I feel like a lot of the stuff in here is stuff that is being worked on. I'm not sure that this is going to speed up that process or make it happen any differently than it's going to happen anyway.
Often when we get to a place like this, and it's become an issue that the legislature is interested in, we can just get an affirmation from the agency that they will work on this and bring us something back and work with the TAC to do that. Is that something that could happen here? Or is it like you're already working on it? I mean, I feel like maybe I haven't looked at the 2010 report. I think that would be a place to start. Are there recommendations in there that the legislature has never picked up? So again, we don't know a lot here.
I mean, the 2010 report was pretty comprehensive, but it effectively recommended the status quo.
Yeah, but I think it'd be worth reading then and understanding why. There's a reason that these 20 professionals looked at this and then came back with a recommendation of the way it is. Which I haven't read. Has anyone read it? Yeah. What's up?
In the 2010 report, they didn't really focus on financial compensation. They did talk somewhat about whether or not legal access was necessary. And legal access is, they said this, legal access is going to lead to tension and or the need for compensation. That I think was the only time that they referenced compensation.
Did you have a question?
I did.
Oh, yeah, Representative Nor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple just related questions. So the 2010 report is the latest one we have, right?
No, they put out a report every year.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The TAC.
Okay.
The 2010 report was a specific one on overshadowing.
Okay. But on the overshadowing topic is the 2010 the latest, or do we have something?
The 2024 and 2025 reports have components that are related to overshadowing.
Given what's asked for in this amendment, how does this differ? How does what's asked for in the amendment differ from what is either in the 2010 report or in updated reports that we've gotten from the TAC?
Well, it's pretty similar to what their charge was in 2010. It's not, it goes beyond what's in the 2024 and 2025. They were focusing on the isolation distances. This basically wants to know what other alternatives there are and whether compensation should be required and when you are going to encumber a neighbor's property for purposes of a potable water supply or wastewater system.
Do any of the reports, and I don't see it in the current amendment, but do any of the reports, including the 2010 report, include an analysis of alternative technology solutions that might reduce those isolation distances?
Well, that's partly what they're thinking about looking at in this, the most recent subcommittee. They're looking at those isolation distances to see if there are ways or alternatives. So you reduce the impact of the overshot.
So that's already kind of on the plate of the TAC.
You mean the subcommittee of the TAC, who's the overshadowing subcommittee?
There's an overshadowing subcommittee.
And Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, I think it's really difficult and maybe, I don't know what other adjective to describe it, but not unethical or whatever, but if a system is permitted, there is no impact to the neighbors. It's permitted by law and regulation, has setback distances. There is no contamination that's going on to the neighbors. Perhaps in theory, it could not. I'm familiar in Springfield with 3 examples of, one's a broken water line and 2 were broken septic systems that are town owned. The town installed the wastewater system and the water line. And there was damage to neighbor's property. That's a civil action. If the one that's being affected wants to sue the entity that owns it, they have that right. Now, I just think it's difficult to legislate compensation and what that fair compensation is if there isn't any contamination that's being transferred from one property to another.
Well, the compensation contemplated here is not about contamination or even the potential for contamination. It's about the limitation on the use of your property and whether or not that limitation should be compensated and I know that there have been takings claims that based on the overshadowing and the last one, I think there was a recent one, but I haven't reviewed that recent decision. The last one I looked at, the court said it wasn't a taking because there were still additional uses that could be made of the property, just not the specific use that the overshadowed neighbor wanted to make. And that's an important thing to remember. People all the time say, oh, that's a taking, that's a taking, that's a taking, that's a taking. Takings are so very rare.
Also a giving, because your property needs the same protection and you get that. So in the case of a camp or anywhere, like, and when I think of these, I think of Waitsfield or any of our villages, like the reason we have this protection is actually so that people could continue to live in health, with health and safety in our villages. Like, that's why we have this. And so I think it's super important to always step back and say, well, what is the problem this is solving? And it is actually, as our understanding of the need to isolate, have these safe distances between wells and septics, and also maintain the value of real estate in our villages that grew up without either of those regulations in place. This was the answer that grew out of that. Seeing nods from Brian Redmond, super important to remember what we get for this also, which is habitability in those places that folks have already invested in and live in successfully with their neighbors today. And it does go both ways. That's why I asked the question about what size parcel we were talking about. It matters. Some of this happens on half-acre parcels, quarter-acre parcels in our villages, when it really starts to get tight. And yet people realize they want to live there and their neighbors want to live there. How can we work this out? Representative Pritchard.
Well, in our case, our lot is 50 feet wide and 150 feet deep. That's what our lot is. So I would say that that's not the case for us and many others on lakefront properties. They have, I would say that they've certainly, if they made the decision to sell the property, it is considerably devalued. Considerably devalued. For us, that's, it's been in the family 100 years. We want it to stay in the family for as long as we can. But as you know, lakefront properties are a premium. So if this was somebody, if we decide to sell this, this would be a huge impediment for us. And I find that to allow the state to encumber somebody else's property, I just somehow through a law, I don't find that certainly beneficial to the person on the receiving end.
Happens all the time. Highway rights of way, electric transmission rights of way, utility access. The law gives that kind of encumbrance a lot.
But this is giving encumbrance from a neighbor, not, this is a step further from that eminent domain as far as I'm concerned. Now you're allowing you to do this to a
Not
neighbor.
eminent domain, it's just like the right of access to abuse. Yeah.
And all those other examples were public good and public shouldn't. This is for private gain for people to use.
Yeah, and it just seems unfair to me that if someone puts in a septic and well on a property, I know their neighbor gets a notice, but what happens after they get the notice? Because that really takes away the value of their land. And I'm just wondering what the notice is. Can they stop it or try to work out a compromise? Or is there any way that like property lines can be set up so that the distance from a property line on either side of the property could contain a septic and well?
I think that's the intent of the notice, is for people to come together to try to work out an alternate solution.
All right, further thoughts on this amendment? Anyone like Hoyt or Ella? Otherwise, we'll move on. Go back to the other amendment.
Ella.
Ella, go ahead.
I don't, I mean, it's a fascinating conversation and it feels like the state's really already doing a lot of this work, but seems very difficultly slow to get answers for Vermonters who are struggling with this.
I agree with Ella. I wouldn't support the amendment at this time.
Wouldn't, he said.
That's not somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Ella said. I don't know that Ella supported or didn't support.
Yeah, I don't, I guess I'd lean towards not supporting the amendment as it is, but if there's something, but I'd like to see the conversation move forward. So maybe making sure we get a really clear report that will spur some conversation at the beginning of next session Sounds like we already get a report, but seems like we need to really focus on this.
Representative Greer.
Yeah, I just, one comment I would make is that this report where it was really highlighted from 2010, again, didn't include the financial compensation. And if this is something that's been significant, I'm very surprised that there hasn't been movement in 16 years. And not to offend anyone that works with DEC and ANR that would oversee this report, but I think that there is a little bit of urgency with it. So I would urge the committee to support it for that reason. If they are working on it, then it sounds like they'll meet the objective and get the report for 27. Thank you.
Let's finish walking through the previous amendment.
Okay, so I believe you're on the fourth instance of amendment, which starts on page 10. Really just a little bit of page 10. And it adds sections 4D through 4H. And so this is outside the potable water supply and wastewater system chapter that your bill and the rest of the amendment addresses.
And I checked with the clerk and is not, she will recommend to the speaker that it's not germane.
You still want me to walk through it?
Folks still want to walk through it.
It's not germane.
I feel like we've already spoken for him. Name, but seem like a good use of our.
So let us and it seems as though the agency has been clear that they don't support the majority of the remainder of the first parts of the amendment either. So I am not inclined to think that this is a good time for us to add this to the mix in a bill that otherwise has unanimous support from our committee and is pretty clear and supported by the administration, which will alleviate. Anyway, it will expedite permitting with the general permits for hookups. And I just think this is muddying the waters. Otherwise, straightforward bill. We were just talking about the fourth instance of amendment.
Yes.
Potentially not being germane.
Yeah, I appreciate
We're choosing not to walk through it.
What's that?
We are choosing not to walk through it with our.
I appreciate that and I respect that.
And then now we're talking about the remainder of the amendment and the reality that ANR doesn't support it and that the underlying bill is moving important things forward with a lot of agreement. So do others have thoughts? Okay, Zakowicz.
Yeah, I would just add that what we heard in the bill yesterday, the amendment yesterday, is that there is a lot of pretty technical ideas in here that are pretty significant changes in rule or policy. And these might be ideas which are worth pursuing. They might be ideas which we decide eventually to put into action. But it's again one of these amendments where we've heard no real testimony about what the pros and cons are, what the unintended consequences are. And I'd have a really hard time supporting this right now. Maybe sometime in the future, this would be great, but this doesn't seem to be the time to be adding this language to statute.
Representative Leaver.
Thank you, Chair. I have a neighbor that's suffering from the shadow. And it's a large piece of land, but slope and grade and soil types are preventing any form of variance. There's been no testing. And I would advocate 16 years of money long time. Plenty of time to get engaged in a more positive venue. And think about doing some testing of shadow areas to see if they are compromised. And if they're not compromised, then look at a variance and issue a permit. And it's time to move forward. Both for personal reasons, legal, certainly financial.
I'm not sure what section you're talking about.
I'm talking about both of those. I'm talking about 16 years. I'm talking about the past.
I think Labor is talking about Rep. Greer's amendment.
First thoughts on this? Senator Pritchard?
Yeah, I think I share Representative Sakowitz's thoughts. This thing. Be a lot of good ideas, but it's. Well, yeah, it needs more time, I think.
Yeah, if we could take all these good ideas and add them to Ella's list of things to take up next year, I think it'd be a good idea. A lot of good ideas in that we should take up. We still have time. It requires, it's gonna require some serious study and
Yeah.
DEC involvement. I mean, gotta give them some time to look at it. Like I said, there's a lot of technical changes being asked for.
Representative Oz.
Yeah, I would just like to recommend that the agency prioritize new technology that's coming online that would meet the requirements for infrastructure, but take up less space. You know, that kind of be a priority to look at.
Representative Chapin.
Thanks. Yeah, I would generally concur that I don't think we should move forward with the amendment, but I do want to note that some sections are not sort of necessary for the agency to take action. Some of these pieces, the agency acknowledged they're already working on in other ways, or like the technology, innovation and technology. The first amendment, I don't think actually has a clear impact one way or another. It's sort of a statement of purpose. And then other sections ANR felt concerned about. So I guess I just would say, I think given each section, either there's concerns from the agency or could already be taken up by the agency, like the long list on page 6, all things that ANR can already choose to include in performance standards. So I guess I just would say I appreciate having looked at this briefly just to bring it to our attention, but I don't think it's something that can move forward at this time.
All right. Any other comments? Yes. Did we have anything else we were going to finish with you this morning? Did we finish up the bottle redemption bureau yesterday, which we contemplated having you in? Okay. Representative Tagliavia.
I thought we had a couple of pages left, but it was on the bottom, but.
You kind of got to the household hazardous products sections and kind of just moved quickly through them.
We were going to look at those with you. Thank you. That's what I remember, but it didn't make the agenda. So sorry. We have a lot of committee assisted crossover. The isolation distances are. All right, so I guess what I'm wondering is anyone in favor of the Olson amendment? Please raise your hand. Not seeing any in favor, so all those opposed, raise your hand.
I'm opposed.
That looks like everyone is opposed. So we appreciate your thoughts and effort and contemplation of this.
And I really appreciate you folks' consideration, but, and I too understand this. It's just not simple issues maybe to put in your mind for, future consideration. So I very much appreciate the time.
Yes, I think people heard that. Thank you. Thank you. And then we now still have the Greer amendment. Folks have further discussion on that? Representative Nor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'll just note that, in answer to the questions I asked, is this significantly different? It's not enormously different from what's been asked for in the past, except for the primary difference being specific recommendations on compensation and how to deal with some of that. It's a bit new. I know they're already working it, but if they're already working it, maybe we ought to just require or ask for a formal report in that regard, to be hoped to like the beginning of next year or sometime early.
January 15th.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So since they're kind of already working it, that date shouldn't be too hard to meet. So I'm kind of, I guess I'm feeling like I'm in favor of it. Sort of asking the person, DC, but Ken, I think Redmond indicated that they could support it. So go forward with that.
Yes, I think we could support the initiative to just put it in focus and the directive to the TAC, work that we are doing. As I indicated, there was one more substantive piece that we would like to have included if this is scoping the extent of the report. And that would be just really establishing the scientific, technical, and legal basis of what exists today. So it's holistic, which a lot of that work has already been done in 2010.
Okay,
Yeah,
Further
I have a
thoughts?
question. I have a question about the TAC and the expertise on that, within that group to tackle compensation issues, because that seems like it wouldn't be sort of a natural fit. And it seems like just a gigantic can of worms. Like I can imagine like so many different possible scenarios in which once you start going down that road that you unleash a lot of difficulty, let's just say. So
Yeah.
I really hesitate to want this committee to potentially weigh in on that. That doesn't, I'm not sure it's the right venue.
It's really interesting. I mean, when you think about compensation, are you talking about retroactive on all those village properties that I'm talking about that do have overshadowing on them? Or are you talking about an affordability issue then? Like, you want to develop our villages affordably? You're gonna have to now pay $30,000 to your neighbor, put your septic in?
That I think is part of the report. Going forward, the legislature would have to legislate that.
And what is the right group of people to look at that issue? Is it the group of engineers and DEC employees that's on the 20-person TAC? Or their subcommittee? Is that a tax department issue? Is that who does that? Technical Advisory Committee is not a compensation, it's finance.
Real property is, the expertise for it is one of those things that's usually privately based. And it's one of the shortcomings in our office because there isn't a lot that is legislated around that type of issue. Overshadowing is one of them, and it took a while to get to notification. Because we tried to do you tried to do compensation, and it was just too many people had an interest that it couldn't really go forward.
When did we try to do that?
12 maybe?
Oh, after the report.
Yeah.
Act 145.
There's more to this story.
2009, sorry.
Representative Chapin.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I just really want to be careful here. It feels like this is, it feels like, and maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like what we're moving towards trying to discuss or get to is whether we leave these being sort of negotiated on a one-off basis between property owners, and maybe that process needs more support, or whether we try and put something in statute or rule or whatnot that dictates how these situations where wastewater sort of that shadow affects two different properties how, you know, trying to dictate how that happens. And I guess I just want to say that there seems like there'd be big pros and cons on either side of that, treating them, you know, individually or trying to treat them all the same. And the intersection right now with our push to really build housing in villages feels like there just must be a rub here that both, again, with both pros and cons. So I guess I just really want to be careful with anything that we try and do. If we're trying to get information, I would be curious about understanding the sort of breadth of things that get negotiated and what ends up sort of working when people do come to agreement, because my guess is it's all over the map. And if somebody where that overshadow is happening has no plans to ever do anything on that small little edge of their property, it might look like one thing. Whereas if it's on, I just can imagine a humongous range of scenarios and agreements between property owners. And I just want to really be careful that my guess is there's good reason that for 18 years or whatnot, or 16 years, the recommendations and the continuation has been to let these be treated as one-off scenarios. And maybe what we should be contemplating is how we support landowners in that negotiation process, and rather than trying to treat them all the same. And so I just want to be careful in anything that we do ask for, that we're just really asking for good, helpful information. And like the chair was saying, you know, really making sure we're also asking the right group of people. Just feels like there's a lot to dig into here. And this is always the challenge with amendments, is like, we would need more time to really thoroughly understand. Thanks.
Yeah. Representative Chapman.
Yeah, I guess that this has been a really interesting discussion. And as we're thinking about this more and I'm looking at the amendment more, it seems like the way this is structured, you know, there's initial questions about looking at the isolation distances, but the way I'm understanding this is that these distances are really grounded in science and our concerns around public health, and the idea that we would have a report that would do anything other than simply confirm that our current practice in the way we do things is that's going to be basically the report's going to say, yeah, we should just continue doing things the way we've been doing them. And I think Rep. Chapin's point that, you know, that this has been going on since that report from 2010, that we haven't changed things, even though there has been yearly, you know, looks into this and ongoing concerns about it, that we haven't changed the way, because maybe the way we're doing it really is just the most sensible. And so it seems like if that's really true, maybe it's not, but if that is true, then it seems like this amendment is really about pushing us towards how do we provide compensation. That seems to be really the crux of what is being asked here. And I think we just heard that compensation is going to be a difficult and very complicated idea to unwind and to make recommendations around. And again, we have it the way it is, maybe for a reason. Maybe the way things work are not wonderful for every party involved all the time, but maybe it's really just the best that we can do, given the inherent conflicts amongst adjacent property owners. And so if this amendment really is about getting to a point of how do we compensate people for perceived damages, you know, by overshadowing from neighbors' properties, then I really have a hard time supporting this amendment.
Representative Greer.
I'm just, there's a few things that I've heard in this. The most recent one is perceived damage. With all due respect, there is damage happening because they're not able to use their property because someone else is building a septic system that they can't use their land. I find that deeply unfair. And just to make this an example with you, Representative Pritchard, because you're right here, if Chris and I have an abutting neighboring property and you were to put a septic system that encroached onto my land, I would sue you. I would sue you. If you were to do that, I would sue you. because you're going onto my land. So and also I heard the term giving land. I'm sorry, that's not giving land. You're taking someone's land because you're establishing a stake first by putting a septic leach field. So I'm sorry. Pause there.
Representative Pritchard.
Yeah, I agree with Will. I mean, 40 years ago, if this came up, my father would go to this landowner who've been friends with years, they'd talk about it, they'd shake your hands, and that'd be the end of it, and it'd be done. But now we go through all this rigmarole and stuff, and it just drives me nuts. And it drives me nuts that there's not, that once this happens, there's not a simple, easy solution to correct it. Litigation, and it sounds like it's an issue because we've heard that there's been tons of litigation. So there is a problem. There is a problem with this, and it does affect the financial well-being of the person that this has been put upon. And I guess if they didn't get the courtesy of the notice, they would never know about it. So I think it's a good amendment. And if it's been 15 years and we're still talking about it, then it's not working. It's just not working. And if the tax not the financial, entity that deals with it, which I agree. I mean, that's not a reason to say, well, let's get to it when we can. I mean, there's people being harmed right now. There's no correction for them, and there should be. Period. End of sentence.
Yeah, just to clarify, my understanding is it's not that septic is going to someone else's land. It's just that other landowner may not be able to build a septic system on their property because of the shadow around it.
Correct.
But it's not that septic is going on.
No, yeah.
Okay, just to clarify.
If I could ask, Mr. Redmond, for a little bit more clarification. We're talking about the movement of subsurface water. Okay.
So it's only gonna restrict certain uses of the neighboring property.
We're not talking about this subsurface water being very deep, is that correct?
That depends on the local hydrogeology, geology.
Okay.
With shallower water being more susceptible to contamination.
Representative Chapin.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Representative Pritchard that there's a problem here, and Representative Greer, and I'm really glad we're talking about it. It's hard to talk about these things at the very end of the session, but I think that there is a problem, and what my impression of the problem is that landowners feel on their own in one-off situations to try and negotiate this with landowners and the state while they're in a permitting process. And there aren't clear guidelines, and they're all sort of being left to figure this out often through and that leads to often utilizing the courts. What I hear is from the state is that really the notice is supposed to provide space before there's actual permit. And maybe we could use some more information here on exactly what happens after notice. But what I presume, given what we've heard so far, is that after notice, parties have a chance to sort of see if they can find some agreement or some compensation, or the other adjacent landowners fine with it and it's not a big deal. And then the permitting process takes that into account in some way, I guess. I'm not clear about that side of the process. Is the agency waiting to see how that works out before they finalize a permit? But what I can tell is a problem is that landowners feel stuck and negotiating this on their own. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is there is a problem. I'm not sure a one-size-fits-all solution is in the best interests of the state or of Vermonters. But maybe it is. And that's what we need to learn about and figure out.
Representative Logan.
My comment on this is that the new issues that are being brought up as potentially something that the TAC could consider really kind of fall out of the jurisdiction of our committee. Because it's the water quality issues that are really under our jurisdiction, but this seems to get into legal matters that I would think judiciary would have something to say about, maybe. I don't know. We're not good. We don't do
Interesting.
property rights. We do land use, but we don't do property rights, so.
Interesting point. Yeah. Okay, other comments on this?
Just one, if I may, I don't disagree with tasking the TAC with our prioritizing or updating their report back to us on some of these issues. But I don't know if we could, I'm not in favor of legislating damages. I think that still is a civil issue if there is damage. And from a leaking septic system or a failed septic system, there would be egregious harm. I also could the TAC give us a recommendation for suggesting alternative septic systems to reduce that overshadowing impact, or perhaps because there are some new technologies maybe that could be used. So I'd like to have them consider that as a recommendation as well, to try to reduce the impact on overshadowing.
Yeah, which I think they are working on, and like and are in the underlying bill. That's an emphasis, I would say. All right, folks ready to vote on this?
And I just wanted to amend that with saying that if we are looking at legislating damages to somebody, perhaps a different system would keep that emphasis on the property that's developing the wastewater and put the cost there, so it would not go compensatory damages to a neighboring property. If it was a better system or a different system that could be used, that maybe cost more, but wouldn't have an effect on the neighbor. So you wouldn't need to pay damages.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I could see you were struggling with how I was trying to get that out.
Okay, all those in favor of this amendment? Before, all those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 1, 6, 7.
But with that said, is there something we can do to emphasize with the TAC? Some of the issues concerned, or are you doing that already?
I think there's a robust number of subcommittees on the TAC working on specific issues, including overshadowing, including evaluating new technology. So I think that work is already occurring.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll get into the rest of